No bomb from a hostile aircraft created this havoc. Enemy artillery was not responsible for smashing these cars, destroying these shops, or breaking up this roadway. Man has a genius for engines of mass destruction, but they were not to blame here. This was the work of Mother Nature in one of her less benign moments. We cannot prevent natural disasters such as this, but scientists are beginning to unravel their causes and to develop ways of predicting when they will strike. That vital search is the subject of this edition of Echo. This was the result of the earthquake which struck with extreme violence at Anchorage, Alaska in 1964. Railway tracks were snapped like twigs, the sea surged in a great wave which hurled fishing boats high and dry on the foreshore. The countryside was laid waste for miles around. In seconds, an entire area had sunk several feet below the street level, tossing buildings, cars, and people about like toys. Some who survived saw the earth open directly under friends and loved ones and close over them seconds later. Hundreds were made homeless, hundreds died, and hundreds more were critically injured. It was a major disaster. Anchorage stands at the northern end of an earthquake belt that runs the length of the Americas from Alaska to Chile. One of its most active sections is the San Andreas Fault in California. Here, a whole section of the Pacific coast is sliding steadily northwards against the continental mass. Right astride the fault stands the city of San Francisco. Further south, the fault is moving, quietly and slowly, doing little damage. Here it is stuck. It has not moved for 64 years. When it does, there could be disaster. The last time it happened was in 1906. The shock shattered hundreds of brick buildings and engulfed the city in flames. Almost 500 people died and another 3,000 were injured. Experts have warned that another earthquake could strike at any time, bringing the skyscrapers and the city's 4 great bridges crashing down. One benefit of this constant threat is that California has become a leading center of world earthquake research. Scientists here believe that warning signals may occur up to 5 years in advance of major earthquakes, and claim they have predicted many in recent years. But prediction is still an imprecise science, and most earthquakes come with no warning to an unprepared population. This was one of them. In March 1970, a tremor struck at the market town of Gediz in Turkey. The town and its surrounding villages were shaken continuously for 48 seconds. At the end of that time, 3/4 of the town was in ruins, and in the villages the destruction was even worse. The inevitable fires broke out, and the survivors could do nothing to prevent them. The town's fire brigade was wiped out in the first moments of the disaster. It quickly became clear that over 2,000 had died, some 5,000 more were seriously injured, and 90,000 were homeless and in urgent need of food and shelter from the bitterly cold wind sweeping across the plains. Relief flowed in from many countries. It helped the survivors to overcome the first days of shock, but could do little to repair their losses or assuage their grief. The disaster showed how helpless man still is in the face of earthquakes. The people of Anatolia know that they live in an earthquake region, but they have nowhere else to go. Gediz will almost certainly rise again, its new buildings hopefully more resistant to tremors than the old. But the next quake may not be at Gediz, and science may still not be accurate enough in its predictions to enable the next doomed town to be evacuated in time. For as one scientist puts it, 90% of the loss of life in earthquakes is caused by weak and improperly constructed buildings.
In the early hours of April 18, 1906, the earthquake struck. Water mains broke, telephone, telegraph, and transportation disrupted. Stoves overturned in a city that contained many pioneer wooden buildings. firefighting became extremely difficult, and flames consumed over 4 square miles of this great city before being brought under control. The damage done by the quake itself was minor, but the fire which followed was a major catastrophe. These scenes, filmed after the fire had been conquered by dynamite, show the search for bodies in the ruins. Army, police, and civilian volunteers did a magnificent job. More than 450 people lost their lives, and property damage was estimated at over $500 million. The fires burned 3 days, left thousands homeless and destitute, except for the clothes on their backs. The Army at the Presidio maintained order, cared for the injured, rescued survivors and reunited families. Oakland, sister city across the bay, extended shelter and help to many. The oldest and greatest city on the West Coast was almost total ruin. Stores, factories, warehouses, banks, offices, homes, all were destroyed. The tragedy shocked the entire world as news stories flashed over the telegraph lines. Under the leadership of the Red Cross, doctors rushed to the stricken city. Fear of an epidemic was general, but the Army and the Red Cross were equal to the emergency and averted this danger. Vigilantes assisted the Army in the prevention of looting and in the preservation of law and order. The real story of the people of San Francisco during these trying days can never be properly told, but its recovery is one of the brightest pages of American history. Almost before the last fire had died out, the civic leaders and businessmen were gathered to make plans for a new and greater San Francisco. Personal fortunes were pledged to the rebuilding of the city. After plans were drawn, the back-breaking task of clearing away the ruins began. Bankers and ditch diggers, lawyers and clerks labored side by side to get the job done. After all, the West had been built by men in shirt sleeves. It could be rebuilt the same way. Because of the fires, the railroads could not come into the city. Long trains of pack mules made the trek from the railhead to the city with supplies of food, medicine, and the first shipments of material for rebuilding. The story of the rebuilding of San Francisco is one of the greatest in the history of our country, but it cannot be told in this picture of 1906. Indeed, it can never be told in full until the end of time, because the city by the Golden Gate is going forward with all America to an even greater future.